Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to episode 2 of my S.Willow guide series. In the previous guide, we covered Chitose's skill build, which is currently her strongest build and outperformed auto attack build by almost 25%. This time though, we are looking at something completely different. We will be covering Chitose Mark build, which I think is the build that most players should be using right now. The reason is simple. It performs extremely well while requiring much less investment. You don't need multiple limited discs or insanely good emblems to get excellent results. In fact, even if you are a new player who only managed to get S.Willow and don't have any other limited Aqua characters, I still have a team recommendation for you later in the video. We'll start by explaining how this build works and why S.Willows make it possible. Honestly, who would have thought that Chitose would end up as a Mark DPS? After that, we'll go through the entire build step by step, including why each potential is chosen, followed by the skill priority, emblems, discs, and talent recommendations. And finally, we will compare the Mark build against the skill build at different investment levels to answer one important question. Can the Mark build still keep up once both teams are heavily invested? By the end of this guide, you will know exactly how to build this team in the best way possible. So without further ado, let's get started. First, I want to show you that this team actually works. As you can see on the screen, the skill build is on the left and the Mark build is on the right. If you compare the score, they are actually really close and basically neck and neck. Now you may be wondering how much investment these teams have. Overall, I would say the investment is pretty average. All of my limited characters are only T0, with the exception of Telia, who is T5. If you want to see the setup, including the talents, emblems, and this, feel free to pause the video. The point I want to make is that Mark build can achieve almost the same result while using a lot less investment than the skill build. Now that we've seen the results, let's talk about how this build actually works. Normally, a Mark team is pretty straightforward. One character applies the Mark, then another character triggers it and deals damage. So what does S.Willow bring to the team? When you add Hovering Gale, it adds one extra Mark hit whenever your team triggers Mark. It actually doesn't happen every time though because it has a short cooldown, but that's the basic idea. Now, by itself, it doesn't sound like much, but the thing is that extra Mark hit has up to 6 to 7 times higher base damage compared to Chitose's Mark, and that's exactly what makes this build possible. Now, there is one important thing you need to know, and this is where a lot of players get confused. Even though that extra Mark hit comes from S.Willow Hovering Gale, it doesn't use S.Willow stats. Instead, the damage scales with whoever triggers the Mark, which in this team is Chitose. And that's why you shouldn't roll pen, crit rate, or mark damage on S.Willow's emblems. And hopefully, none of you have made that mistake yet, right? Now let's move on to the build. I will start with the overall idea behind Chitose's build before we go to each important potential. For Chitose, we are going with a hybrid build, and there are two main reasons for that. The first is, we want her to trigger Mark as often as possible. That is why we picked Serpent's Glide and level 1 Aqueous Phantasm, since both of them attack very frequently and also can trigger Mark. This also makes the build very auto-friendly. You can pretty much leave it on auto and just keep attacking to trigger Mark as often as you can. The second reason is that we want to take advantage of the energy generation from her skill. That's why we take Against the Flow, which cut her skill cooldown by half, and level 1 Returning Tide, which converts her skill into the enhanced version, since the enhanced skill version generates a lot more energy than the normal one, allowing your entire team to spam their ultimates even without charge efficiency on their emblems. And if you are wondering whether you need to turn on Chitose's ultimate animation like in the skill build, the good news is you don't. Since this build doesn't use Serpent in Tide, you don't have to worry about that buff anymore. After that, we fill the remaining slots with attack buffs to further increase the mark damage. Now, let's move on to S.Willow. The most important potential here is Hovering Gale, since it is the core of this entire build. After that, we take Words Unchanged. On top of having damage boost, this potential also doubles the maximum stack of her debuff from 6 to 12. And that's what really makes this one another core potential for this build. Finally, Tilia. The most important potential for her is Blinding Beam, since it applies 300% mark damage taken, making her one of the strongest supports for any mark team. Just make sure that the boss stays inside her skill circle, so the debuffs stay active. For her last potential, the choice depends on your charge efficiency. If you can use her ultimate frequently, Night Courage is the better option. Otherwise, if you don't have enough charge efficiency, just take Guardian Resolve instead. Let's talk about the investment priority in this team. One of the best things about this build is how little investment it actually needs. You will see why as we go through each part, starting with skill upgrades. For Chitose, you don't need to upgrade any of her skills. As you can see on the screen, almost all of her damage comes from Mark. So upgrading her skill barely increases the team's damage. Tilia and S.Willow are very similar, even though both of their support skills provide buffs to the team. Those buffs don't scale very well with the skill levels. Because of that, level 7 is already enough and there is really no need to max them. As for their ultimate, Tilia's ultimate doesn't provide any team buff, so you can safely skip it. S.Willow's ultimate is a bit better since it provides attack buff, but it doesn't scale very well either. On top of that, this team already has around 500 to 600% attack, which means upgrading it doesn't make much difference either. So overall, there is really no need to spend many resources on the skill upgrades. Now let's move on to the emblems, starting with Chitose. You want 80% mark damage on all 3 emblems, just like any other mark DPS. It is one of the best that you can get, and it's also very easy to roll. Now if you are planning to go for Rainbow Pen as well, there is one mistake I see a lot of players make. Do not lock 80% mark damage and then try to roll for Rainbow Pen as the second stat. Instead, use another slot and keep rolling until you get Rainbow Pen first. Once you get that, lock it and then roll for 80% mark damage as the second stat. Even though 80% mark damage gives a bigger increase than Rainbow Pen, doing this is much more efficient because Rainbow Pen is much rarer to find. Trust me, you don't want to spend hundreds of emblem locks trying to roll Rainbow Pen as second stat. As for level 90 emblem, you can safely skip all of Chitose's potential plus 3. They only provide a small damage increase, so they are not worth your resources. Now let's move on to Tilia. The first thing you should look for is Blinding Beam plus T on her level 90 emblem. As we mentioned before, it is one of the core potential for this team and gives a significant boost to Chitose's mark damage. After that, try to get around 30% charge efficiency so she can spam her ultimate throughout the fight. And that's really all you need from Telia. S.Willow is very similar. There are really only two things you want from her emblems. First, Hovering Gale plus 3. It is the biggest damage upgrade for this team. After that, aim for at least 20% charge efficiency, so she can cast her ultimate 5 times during the fight. Beyond that, the next best upgrades are Engulfing Tide and Words Unchanged. They are still nice to have, but compared to Hovering Gale, the difference isn't even close. And this is one of the reasons why this build is so much cheaper to build than the skill build. Now let's move on to the disc recommendations. For the main slot, the 3 best options are Chitose Signature, C6 Cataclysm, and S.Willow Signature. Even though 2 of them are limited discs, the damage increase from Aqua Disc is still very competitive. So don't worry if you don't have the limited disc, the free-to-play options are pretty good as well. As for other support discs, the best option would be the Aqua Disc. However, if you are already using Aqua Disc and C6 Cataclysm in your main slots, then your next best option would be C6 of Element Disc instead. Now, let's move on to the talent recommendations. Starting with Chitose, her talent progression is basically the same as the skill build. If you are looking for a stopping point, T2 is a solid place to stop. Otherwise, you can go all the way to T5 if you want. As for S.Willow, T2 and T5 are the 2 stopping points that I would recommend. That's because both of them provide Aqua damage taken. And you probably heard me say this many times already, but Aqua doesn't have many sources of Aqua damage taken, which make both of these talents extremely good. As for T3, it isn't a big upgrade here because it mainly gives critical damage, and this build doesn't have much quick rate to take advantage of that. So just like the skill build, you can stop at T2 or go all the way to T5. And for the part that some of you probably have been waiting for, how does the Mark build compare to the skill build at different investment levels? Let's start with no emblems at all. On the left side is the skill build, on the right side is the Mark build. To make this a fair comparison, both teams use the same disc, and all of limited characters are at T0. At the bare bones level, the skill build has a pretty big lead, because the Mark build relies heavily on mark damage from emblems. But once we start adding emblems, the numbers change significantly. Let's start with the generic stats. For the Mark build, simply giving Chitose mark damage is already enough to overtake the skill build. On the other hand, for the skill build to catch up, you need to invest in both Chitose and Donna by giving each of them skill damage on their emblems. Now let's make the comparison a little more realistic by adding core potential plus 3 to each of them. For the Mark build, upgrading Hovering Gale and Blinding Beam almost doubles the team's damage. But for the skill build, potential plus 3 alone still isn't enough. You also need skill plus 3 on both Chitose and Donna. Finally, for the skill build to pull ahead, you will also need to replace C6 Cataclysm with Donna Signature. And if your Chitose in Mark team already has 1 Rainbow Pen, then the skill build will need 2 Rainbow Pens, each on both Chitose and Donna, just to keep up. And as you can see, both builds are pretty much neck and neck at this level of investment, which is about what you can expect from the top 100 leaderboard. The real difference is that skill build takes significantly more investment to get there. And finally, what happens if we start giving these characters some talents? Does it change anything? For Chitose and S.Willow, not really. The reason is pretty simple. Any talent that increases the damage in skill build also increases the damage in mark build as well. So the comparison between these two doesn't really change. The only exception is Donna. You can still invest in her talent, which lets the skill build scale even further. So for most players, mark build is by far the better choice. It requires much less investment, whether it's the character themselves, emblems, this, while giving basically the same results. The only exception is if your Donna already has some talents. In that case, the skill build becomes better option here. And that pretty much sums up the comparison between these two builds at different investment levels. Before we end this video, let me give you one more alternative team. This one is for those of you who only have S.Willow and don't have Chitose and Donna. The nice thing about Aqua Mark team is that S.Willow can turn almost any Aqua character into a Mark DPS, as long as they can trigger Mark from the main slot, whether that is Freesia, Chimiao, Iris, or even Donna. The only difference is how often they can trigger Mark and how well they can buff themselves. I'm going to recommend Freesia Mark made by Morph. It performs well enough and is a great option if you don't have any auto-limited characters. And just in case, some of you might be wondering why Doomsday Blessing isn't included in this build. The reason is that it doesn't actually work the way in-game description says, and it doesn't do anything for this build. As for the minimum investment, just like any other Mark DPS, try to get 240% Mark damage on Freesia first. That alone is already a solid starting point for the build. So to wrap everything up, the Mark build is a fantastic alternative if you don't have Donna, or you don't want to invest into multiple limited discs. It performs as good as the skill build while requiring much less investment. Another nice thing about this build is that if you've already built Tilia for another Mark team, you can just put her in this team without changing anything, since Blinding Beam works well in every Mark team. Now, if you are aiming for the absolute best damage, the skill build still has a higher ceiling, but getting there requires much more investment, especially if you are planning to invest into Donna's talents and better emblems. And that's everything I want to cover in this guide. One last question before I go. Would you like me to make a guide for Chitose's auto attack build as well? Based on my current models, it's about 25% weaker than both skill build and mark build. But if you are still interested, let me know in the comments. And as always, if I missed anything or you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I will do my best to answer every one of them. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.